Welcome to BaggingGuys tutorial on how to reinstall the belts on a Doboy HS-BII sealer. In this case, we have an HS-BII that has one belt that has come off the machine toward the bottom of the machine. The other belt has come off of its drive pulley and is up toward the machine on the motor side of the machine. To reinstall the belts, it's recommended that you have a 3mm Allen wrench, a 2mm Allen wrench. A small flat-bladed screwdriver is usually useful, and a pair of snap ring pliers would be necessary if you need to change your drive pulleys at all. If the drive pulleys are intact, then there's no need for the snap ring pliers, but to change these you'll want a pair of snap ring pliers that you can use to remove this snap ring. Before reinstalling the belts, it's a good idea to check the pulleys on the machine to make sure that your pulleys are installed correctly. So on the HS-BII, the drive pulleys are the pulleys that have a hole in them with a flat in it. The idler pulleys that go at the infeed end of the machine have a bearing that is actually embedded in the pulley. The drive pulleys should be installed so that the plate that's attached to the pulley, that's glued onto the pulley, is facing up toward the motor. So if the machine is oriented like this, you would want this pulley to be installed this way, with the pockets or recesses in the pulley facing downward. The idler pulleys that are installed at the infeed end of the sealer should be installed in the opposite direction from the pulleys that are installed at the drive end. So these are the pulleys that have the bearing in them, and the side that has a flat plate that is glued on, not the side with the pockets in it, should be facing down, and you should see them when you look at the bottom of the machine. You should see the flat plate side. In both cases, over time, it's common for the side plates of these pulleys to get pulled off of the pulley and to pop off, and that's often a root cause for the carrier belts coming off of the sealer. So it's not uncommon to open up a machine that has had the belts come off and discover that, on the idler end, the plate has maybe fallen off and is completely lost, or perhaps it's just pulled off and loose. On the drive end of the machine, when the plate comes off, it will usually be retained by the drive shaft. It'll just be sitting there on top of the pulley, kind of hanging out loose and floating around. But once these come off, then it's easier for the belt to just ride off of the pulleys. So if your belts come off, you want to look closely and make sure that your pulleys are still intact, and that the side plate that is glued onto each of them is in fact still securely attached to the pulley. If you do need to change a pulley on your sealer, on the infeed idler end, you would simply remove the pan head screw with a flathead screwdriver. You would take the screw out, and then the pulley will lift off of its tension arm, put the new pulley in place, and put the lock washer and the screw back in place, and secure the pulley on the tension arm. A quick note about tension arms. On the original sealers, the original HS-BII sealers, the tension arms were a square metal profile with just one screw that comes in from the side that locks them in place to hold tension in place. So if you look at the ends of the left and right tension arm on the older HS-BII sealers, you'll see that the tension arms are identical. If you look at the current version and the newer version, usually anything after about 1997, you'll have a pair of tension arms on the machine that are different, in that the hub that the pulley rides on is offset toward the center of the machine. So as you're looking at these, this would be the right hand tension arm and this would be the left hand tension arm, and each of these would have the pulley installed on it like that. The newer style tension arms that are left and right actually use two screws. There's a screw that will come in from the side and then a shorter screw that comes in from what is the bottom of the sealer, and both of these are used to lock the tension arms in place and to hold tension on your carrier belts. A good first step for reinstalling your carrier belts is to loosen the tension arms so that you can slide the tension arms toward the motor end of the machine. The older style machines with the identical tension arms that are just square will have one screw on each side of the machine to loosen if you're going to remove the tension from the carrier belts. So you would loosen that screw and then the tension arm will slide in. This machine is the newer style. It has the two screws, so you'll need to loosen the side screw as well as the screw on the bottom for each side of the machine, and that will let the tension arm move in and out. Once you have the tension removed from the tension arms, then it's possible usually to pull the belts off of the machine. That probably is a good place to start, just so that you're not trying to deal with any wrinkles or folds in a belt that isn't installed properly. To remove the belts, and with most maintenance on the HS-BII sealer, it's important to remember that one side of the machine, the side that has the thermostat attached to it, as well as the newer machines that have a thermometer on them, would be the side with the thermometer attached. That side of the machine is fixed, and there are a pair of set screws right where my fingers are pointing that lock this belt guide in position, and that defines the center line of the sealer. The opposite side of the machine, the side that does not have the thermostat or thermometer attached, you should see springs behind the belt guides, and those are pushing this belt guide in toward the fixed side of the machine, and that's what's creating the friction then between the belts that grips the bag and moves it through the sealer. To remove the carrier belts from the machine, you'll want to free up some space between the carrier belt guides here. These are the long straight plastic pieces here. They're usually brown and they run pretty much the length of the internal part of the machine. On the fixed side of the machine with your 2mm Allen wrench, you loosen the set screws that are in positions there, and that will let the fixed side belt guide get pushed over toward the fixed side of the machine by the springs on the spring-loaded side. I'll take this moment to point out too that on the spring-loaded side of the machine there should not be set screws in the holes here. If there are set screws here, it will lock up the spring-loaded side and it will prevent the springs from being able to do their job and to push the spring-loaded side toward the fixed side. So if you do have screws in these two holes on the spring-loaded side, take them out and don't put screws in there. With the fixed side pushed all the way over toward the fixed side, because we've loosened the two set screws here, you want to pull back on the spring-loaded belt guide. You can often do it with just your fingers and your fingernails, but if it's too difficult, you can also put like an Allen wrench in the holes of the belt guide and use that to pull back on the spring-loaded belt guide. So with the belt guide pulled back, that gives you a free space between the guides that's usually enough to pull the belts out of the middle of the machine. So now with the belts out of the machine, it's a good idea to give them a close examination, make sure that there's not any fraying or kinking in the belt. As they wear, you'll often see some fraying that starts to occur on the teeth of the belts, and sometimes you'll see like some thready fraying along the top and bottom edges of the belt. These belts are both fairly new and in excellent condition. To remove and to change one of the drive pulleys on the HS-BII, you would take a pair of snap ring pliers and you would put the pins on the snap ring pliers into the holes in your snap ring. You apply a gentle outward force that releases the ring from the drive shaft. While you're pulling the ring open, it's often useful to slip a thin screwdriver underneath the one side of it to help pry it off of the shaft. So with the snap ring removed, you should be able to lift the pulley right off of the sealer. There's often one or maybe two shim washers that are in place between the pulley and the snap ring, and that's designed to hold the pulley in a tight position, a relatively tight position on the shaft, so it doesn't slide up and down too much. But you would remove the old pulley and then take a new pulley, again making sure that the side that has a plate glued onto it is facing the motor, so that would go down if your machine is laying upside down like this one is. And slide that new pulley into place, replace the any of these shim washers which may have been there. And using your snap ring pliers again, you'd replace the snap ring on the shaft, making sure that it locks into the groove that's cut in the bottom of the drive shaft. Typically you'll hear it click into place when you've got it pushed down into the groove. At that point the pulley is locked in place on the bottom of the sealer. So with all four pulleys correctly installed in the sealer, and with both of your tension arms in a loose position and pushed all the way in toward the middle of the machine, you'll take your first carrier belt, and I usually put it on the spring-loaded side of the sealer first, but it really doesn't matter which side you start on. You take the belt and put it onto the teeth of the drive pulley, and then rotate the pulley slightly and let the belt kind of walk down between the two pulleys. Sometimes it's fairly tight, but if you rotate them slowly, the belt will usually slip down onto the pulley. You'll want to hold it in place as best you can on the drive pulley by putting a little tension on it with your other hand, and then pull back on the belt guide so that you can slide the belt back down between the belt guides. You may find it useful to tighten the set screws on the fixed side to hold the fixed side belt guide over toward that side of the machine and out of the way while you're putting the belts into place. I'm going to leave mine loose, but that may be something that would help you to keep this guide from moving around while you're putting belts on. So once you have the belt guide on the drive pulley and led down the center of the machine, you can typically fit it over the idler pulley, and then making sure that it's definitely on both of the pulleys. Pull outward on the idler pulley, just enough to hold some tension on it at this point, and then lock up one on the newer machines or the one screw on the older style machines to keep some tension on that belt. By keeping tension on it, it'll make it easier to slide the second belt down into the gap between the belt guides. So you take the second belt, place it over the drive pulley on its side of the machine, and again rotate it a little bit so that the belt will move down between the pulleys. Then holding back on the spring-loaded side like you did for the first belt, you'll want to feed the second belt down into the center line of the machine. As you do this, you want to make sure that you're careful not to put any twists or kinks in the belts. They should lead straight through the machine and lay flat against one another in the middle. So once the belts are generally in place, they don't need to be perfect, but once they're both generally in place between the two belt guides, you want to put the second belt on both of the pulleys and apply some gentle tension to it and tighten one of the screws that locks the tension arm in place. Now that you have both belts reinstalled on the machine, but maybe not perfectly aligned in where they should be, if you look here, you'll see that the belt on the fixed side of the machine is riding a little lower than it should, and this belt is sticking up a bit. But with the belts in place, usually if you just rotate the machine a little bit manually, the belts will fall into position and lay nicely between their respective belt guides. Once they're laying neatly between the two belt guides, then you're in a position to pull over on the fixed side belt guide until you get these belt guides centered in the middle of the machine. The goal is to put the center line of the machine where the two belts come together directly over the gap between your heater bars. So as you do that, I often look at the amount of heater bar that I can see behind this aluminum stiffener. I see it here. You can also see it here. On the other side of the machine, currently you can't see any, but as I move the fixed side over toward the spring-loaded side, you'll see the heater bar start to appear right here. And I want to make sure that I see an even amount, or an equal amount, of heater bar on each side of the machine when I'm done, so that I know my carrier belts are centered over the gap between the heater bars. So to position those in the center, I will take my 2mm Allen wrench in one hand, and with my other hand on the spring-loaded side of the machine, I'm gripping the fixed side belt guide and pulling it toward the spring-loaded side of the machine until it's in its center position. When I have it in the position I want it, then I will tighten the two set screws on the fixed side of the machine. Now that I have the center line about where it needs to go, I'll take my 3mm Allen wrench and loosen the lock screws for the tension, and I'll actually pull to put a little more tension on the tension arms. I'll do that for each side of the machine. On the newer machine, you'll want to tighten both of the lock screws on each tension arm. The amount of tension that you put on the belts isn't too critical. You want enough tension so that the belts won't come off of the pulleys while you're using the machine, but you don't want it so tight that you can strum it and play a note on the belt. So it should, return to its position when you put a little pressure on it, but it shouldn't sound like a guitar string. So now that I've reapplied tension to both belts, I want to double check my center setting. Usually you'll need to make some minor adjustments to get the belt exactly centered. Another way to do this is to take a flat-headed screwdriver and put it behind the aluminum stiffener on the fixed side of the machine, between the stiffener and the mounting block for that guide. And then twisting it a little bit or pushing it a little bit to pry the belt guide, you can loosen your set screw and then very easily make small adjustments to the position of the belt guide to get it to the center where you want it to be located. You have to repeat that for each end of the belt guide. So you want to make sure that both of those set screws are snugged up. You don't want to crank them down too hard or you'll strip the holes in the mounting block, but you do want them tight enough so that the belt guide won't move at all. Then you'll want to double check and make sure that when you look at the heater bar that you can see behind the aluminum stiffener of your belt guides that you're seeing an even amount of heater bar at both ends of the carrier belt guides, and that tells you that the center line of your carrier belts is now positioned over the center line of the gap between your heater bars. So at that point, if the center line is reestablished and the belts are locked in position with the set screws on the fixed side of the machine, and the tension is back on the bands, and your pulleys are installed correctly, the machine should be ready to power up and to run. When you initially power up, you may get a little bit of chatter or shudder or something as the carrier belt sort of drops into all of its correct grooves and things, but after a revolution or two of each of the end pulleys, the belt should stabilize and be running true in the belt guides and around all of the pulleys. So thank you for using Doboy sealers, and if you need parts or have any questions about adjustments for your machine, feel free to call us.